It's Tuesday, the 7th of September. You're watching The Quest with me, Addiel Sabir. Well, the United States' withdrawal from Afghanistan has left many people wondering what next for the region, particularly as the Afghan Taliban now scramble to put forward their government. The world waits with bated breath. And of course, the United States has said that its mission is complete in Afghanistan and the objectives have been reached. Now, of course, we have to wind the clock back to as to why the Americans were in Afghanistan in the first place following the 9/11 attacks. The Americans had said to the world that you're either with us or without us. The Afghan Taliban at the time were harboring the Al-Qaeda leadership, and following various different veiled threats, the Americans then had decided that it was time now to go in and seek revenge for the attacks of 9/11. Now, the recent developments have left everybody quite surprised at the speed in which everything transpired. But just again, if we go back 2 weeks, there was an evacuation which took place. The Americans withdrew some 130,000 people or thereabouts, including their own and others Afghans who wanted to leave. And during that evacuation process, ISIS, the so-called Islamic State, its K chapter, carried out a rather deadly attack in Kabul, killing some 13 American soldiers and wounding and killing countless other Afghans who were present at the airport. Now, at such a high security position like the Kabul airport, how did ISIS manage to infiltrate? And what are the security challenges now facing Afghanistan? Moreover, has the United States been sincere in defeating Al-Qaeda and ISIS? Go back again further to the Syria crisis. Of course, we see the rise of ISIS in Iraq and in Syria. What was the role of the Americans in defeating ISIS there, which gave up its so-called Islamic State in 2018 or thereabouts? To help us unravel whether or not the United States is sincere in its pledges regarding defeating Al-Qaeda and ISIS, we're joined by a panel of guests. First, let me introduce General Retired Name Khalid Lodi. He's a defence analyst. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Joining us from Lahore, Wayed Jafri, a political analyst, and Isa Naqvi joins us from Islamabad. He's also a political analyst. If I may, if I begin with you, General Lodi, it is said by the Americans that, of course, the operational side of things are now over in terms of that the Al-Qaeda leadership, or its capability, has been vastly reduced in Afghanistan. And of course, we've seen that Al-Qaeda does have branches elsewhere across the world. But coming back to that period of 1998 when Bill Clinton ordered cruise missiles to be fired into Afghanistan, where the Al-Qaeda leadership was first set, and then we saw the 9/11 attacks. How would you have summarized the performance of the Americans, particularly, and its allies in Afghanistan in defeating, or at least dismantling, what it says is the crucial leadership of Al-Qaeda and its capability of carrying out attacks far and wide?
I think initially America and the allies, because they had full support of the world and also United Nations Security Council resolutions, so their attack on Afghanistan seemed legitimate. Although Afghan Taliban had offered that we can send Osama bin Laden to some third country where he can be tried or give us the proof. Okay, let us forget about that. But still, because of that, the incident was so big, 9/11, that we can say that initially the way they attacked could be justified. But in my assessment, they actually routed Al-Qaeda within the first 2 years, even less, except for Osama bin Laden, who was also killed about 10 years back. So after this, they did destroy Al-Qaeda, and I think there was only remnants left, and they couldn't have again, recouped or. So this, what they now say that they've achieved, actually they had achieved 18 years back, and if it was for their leader, he was killed 10 years back. So what were they doing for the remaining 10 years? Actually, this lack of focus created a lot of problem for them, the Americans. I keep on saying that that was not the only objective. That was the initial objective. But the real objectives were the China's ingress in the region, the Russian, reach to the Indian Ocean, BRI, CPAC, our nuclear assets, and Iranian nuclear activities. So these were all their objectives, and all these objectives are still there. So whereas they have left physically, and they made sure that as long as they are here, this Afghanistan remains a block, a stumbling block, a resistor between Chinese, march forward, economic march, and also the Russian move towards the Indian Ocean, and they actually succeeded in that. So we can't say that they haven't got anything. They have pushed back the Chinese ingress and the Russian desires at least 10 to 15 years back. So that way we can say that initially, in the initial 2 years, they achieved the destruction of Al-Qaeda. And in the remaining 15 years or 18 years, they achieved these things that they kept at bay as far as Chinese economic and political march is concerned. So they have achieved a lot. The only thing is that what they are saying is not the truth. The truth is what they are not saying.
Okay, well, you've actually touched on what we were going to come to in the second part of the program, which is this perception of this new Cold War, which is developing perhaps between the United States and China, and this was the playing ground for both of these superpowers. Well, we'll come to that in the second part of the program. It's coming now over to Moyed Jafri. Ms. Jafri, I mean, if we go back to the time of 1998, when we saw this Operation Infinite Reach, which was launched by the then President Clinton, firing cruise missiles into camps which were allegedly of the Al-Qaeda leadership. It seems that the Al-Qaeda leadership somewhat has almost meted into sort of a transparent, sort of intransparent kind of body, which no one really seems to know who's heading right now. It's kind of a little bit less focused, perhaps, after the killing of Osama bin Laden. Ayman al-Zawahiri, who was the second in command, who is supposed to be leading, who's quite elderly now, has a softer approach. And it seems as if since 9/11, there have not been any real spectacular attacks. So does that suggest that the leadership perhaps is faltering a little bit, and the support network for Al-Qaeda is faltering?
I'd like to believe the latter, because the support network, when it comes to Al-Qaeda, it might not be, because it was there were multiple reports by the U.S. intelligence and House committees where they were basically blaming a number of GCC countries, not as in state-sponsored, but individuals from these rich GCC countries who were allegedly based on Pentagon's reports and the White House reports that they were basically funding Al-Qaeda. They could never actually substantiate that at any international legal forum, but it was basically understood, or you could say that generally accepted, that because their funding was basically cut, which was why they were not as lethal as they were in the past, especially in these regions. But once again, if you look at how Al-Qaeda has transformed, like you said, it's now this some sort of a transparent, amorphous body where you don't see the kind of, for the lack of a better expression, the superstar that used to, wreak havoc in the world. Those are particularly missing. But the basic problem now is that the U.S. is now identifying it as a major threat once again, saying that it is rising in parts of Africa, and it's rising in other parts of the world where the U.S. needs to fight against it. Once that is taken care of, then they would proceed. But we have to, I'd like to point that out, that while the U.S. talks about containing Al-Qaeda, we might want to bring ourselves back to 2015, when the Pentagon admitted that it was funding and arming al-Nusra, which was the biggest Al-Qaeda faction in Syria at that point of time, which raises a lot of questions as to, is the U.S. basically committed to eliminating terrorism that is from Al-Qaeda, the terrorist threat from Al-Qaeda, or is it that it is only interested in serving its own agendas and interests wherever it sees fit. Al-Qaeda is a threat wherever they can help the American objective of, going against its enemies like Syria. There they can pair up with Al-Qaeda and it's no problem.
And of course, we know of Al-Qaeda's other chapters, particularly now we've seen a stronger presence recently, or more recently, in Africa. Issa, coming over to you, it seems the Al-Qaeda network has been making gains somewhat in Africa. Particularly now we also see their chapter going by the name of Al-Shabaab in Somalia as well. And it doesn't seem that there is a concerted effort by the Americans to perhaps focus on Africa. So as Muhammad was saying, that it only serves the Americans in its own interests, and they will only act in particular areas where they feel that it might have some repercussions to the United States, but otherwise they would just like to leave it on other people's doorstep. Is that true to some degree?
Let me also just try to pick a thread from what Moyed Jaffrey was saying and also try to make it a bit simpler for everyone out there. The threat from ISK, IS Khorasan, and Al-Qaeda emanating from Afghanistan. Who was in charge of Afghanistan in the last 20 years? The United States of America and dozens of its allies. The most powerful and modern militaries in the world, the richest democracies in the world. They were in charge of Afghanistan. Where is it based? ISK. North of Afghanistan, northeastern Afghanistan, some pockets in other parts of Afghanistan. What was Pakistan saying in the last 20 years? That there is not a military solution. You are killing Taliban. You are fighting Taliban. This is a wrong policy, wrong approach. Do not let TTP and other groups operate from the Afghan soil. That was not adhered to. The US and its allies did not listen to what Pakistan was saying. What happened after 20 years? They have left Afghanistan with virtually no infrastructure to fight that threat, which is coming from ISK, the so-called Daesh Khorasan and Al-Qaeda, some other groups. Who was the what is their base? How did they recruit people from some defections from Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, TTP, which Pakistan was saying is the actual threat that was allowed to operate. And now, after they have left, what are their choices? Even we see in the past 5 to 6 years, Russia and Iran. Why did they start cozying up with Taliban? Taliban today, they are in charge of Afghanistan. And for the US and its allies, Taliban, who they were fighting with, they
We'll try to get back to Issa. We've lost Issa there very momentarily. Re-established connection there. Coming over to you, General Lodi. Just want to quickly pick up on one of the two things that Issa has touched on, the abandonment of the Americans and, of course, them being present for the last 20 years. It's awfully difficult for the layman to understand how these groups can suddenly appear with such sophisticated weaponry, with financing which is received from all over the world, and it's been taking place right under the noses. I just want to talk about this IS, so-called Islamic State K, the Khorasan chapter. I mean, it seems to be made up of a mix and match between, perhaps, as Issa was saying, the TTP or the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, and also some defectors from perhaps the Afghan Taliban. But we've seen very categorically statements from the Afghan Taliban saying that they won't allow them the space. They have a different ideological setup and thought process to the Afghan Taliban. How confident are you that the Afghan Taliban will be able to chase them out? Because we did see at the beginning when they started to sweep through Afghanistan, they started off up the north where they have obviously borders with Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, and that's where they say there were some pockets or cells which were operating there. So do you see that the Afghan Taliban will be, in order for them to, obviously they have to keep a face in front of the international community, they don't want their space to be compromised by IS. Do you think that the Afghan Taliban have the resolve to drive them out of Afghanistan?
First, let me make a short comment on what my two colleagues have said. I think they've made these things very clear. And I don't think now laymen would be confused that how and why this Daesh and ISIK, they were created and who created them. I think it's very clear. Americans have been using them wherever they liked. And what they actually do is that they first create these monsters somewhere and then they go after them. The purpose is to go into that country and then other things. So I leave it here. That now, what are Afghan Taliban good at? If we look at this, just near future, near past, and even the past, they are good at fighting. And if they have been good at fighting against such formidable forces like US and their allies, if they really want to fight against Daesh, and I think within their country, I think that it should be much, much easier for them as compared to fighting such strong forces. So it all depends that actually that would be a litmus test that in the next 6 months to 1 year, how do they tackle with Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan and Daesh and ISIK? And, even Americans are offering their support that if they want to go after Daesh and ISIK, we can help them. I think there's no need for the American help. If any help is required, it can be taken from regional countries, and many of them would be, I think, willing to help them. So in my own opinion, I'm quite confident, the main crux of your question, I'm quite confident that if they really want to eliminate Daesh and ISIK and TTP from their land, or if they want to make them ineffective by both talking and fighting, I think they can do it. And I'm confident that they will do it.
Moya Jafri, very quickly, if I just want to end this segment on you. As General Lodi has said, that he believes that the Taliban do have the resolve. But obviously, we're not really sure of the numbers. I mean, there's no accurate way of determining how many of these cells exist, especially when we have hundreds of prisoners being freed from the prisons we hear of late, and those who have sort of dissipated and sort of blended into the rest of society. So how difficult really do you think it is to keep, or the Taliban to keep an eye or keep a track of who exactly is Daesh or who exactly is Al-Qaeda? How difficult do you think it is, their task?
Well, it is complicated, that's for sure, but it would not be that difficult because of the basic nomenclature of how the Afghan society is woven. They're basically tribes, very tightly wound, very closely knit, and they're ethnic groups too. Their relationships between each other, they're very strong at times, or their animosities or rivalries, those two. So basically, they know each other inside out. There are tribes in which certain individuals were with the Afghan National Defense Forces, while the others were supporting Taliban or fighting for the Taliban, and they both respected each other for that matter. So it would be easier for them, relatively easier than any other society, for them to figure out where exactly is the recruitment being leaked from, in which areas, under which ethnicities, under which tribes. So that will make it a tad bit easier for them. The question, however, will be, like we discussed earlier in the program, is how inclusive can the Taliban get with their government formation? We're getting information out of Kabul that there are certain groups within the Taliban which are, which demand a more stringent government formation. The Taliban are looking to make it as inclusive as possible, because the more inclusive it will get, the more people will feel represented, and that is where they will feel the ownership of the government. And this leaking of fighters and recruitment drives for groups like ISIS-K can be, it can be stopped. On the earlier program, earlier question, pardon me, I wanted to make a quick observation before the segment ends, which was that Biden and the United States, like you said, they were basically talking about moving their fight out of Afghanistan against ISIS and Al-Qaeda, especially mentioning Syria and Iraq, that that's where they'll be fighting them next, which is pretty awkward, because very recently Biden has committed that he'll be pulling out all of American combat troops out of Iraq, especially at a time when there are other attacks once again, even though they are defeated, re-emerging in the region, especially in Iraq and Syria. So it's just completely mind-boggling, the policy of the United States regarding these organizations that it calls basically the axis of terror and threat to the world, where at one end, Mr. Biden stands at the White House and talks about going in hard against Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Iraq, and in the very next moment, he's committing to pull all the troops out. So the topic, like you pointed out, it is kind of questionable, America's commitment I'm talking about, and its conviction regarding and its fight against Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and what circumstances define them to be harmful. Is it just the American interest or the world's greater interest?
And of course, I mean, this rhetoric we've heard that just shortly 20 minutes after Trump's inauguration, where he made a speech regarding the America First foreign policy, saying that their highest priority was to defeat ISIS and other radical Islamic groups, and that they would not allow them to take root in the United States. So whether or not they follow through and are sincere in defeating ISIS, as Mohammad Jafri said, remains to be seen, because, as he pointed out, that they are all set to leave Iraq at the end of this year as well. And that, of course, could be problematic. And that's where the Islamic State had set up shop for the past number of years. Right, time now for us to take a short break. Welcome back, and you're watching The Quest with me, Addiel Sabir. Now, just before the break, we spoke about the situation, the evolving situation in Afghanistan, the latest US withdrawal, the US intentions in the region, and of course now in this particular region, which affects Pakistan, Pakistan being a direct neighbor of Afghanistan, and of course China. Now, China's role has become more and more prominent of late. We have this, the Road Belt Initiative, which has been floated by President Xi Jinping. Now, the Belt Road Initiative has a direct connectivity with the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. In effect, this corridor would allow China access right the way through Pakistan, down to Gwadar, which is the world's largest deep-sea port, and of course through Afghanistan and onto the Central Asian states as well. So this area all set to become an economic hub. Now, this comes as the United States once was vying for the #1 spot as the #1 country in the world, not in terms of its economic might, but also its military might, now feeling challenged rather by the rise of China. So is there a new Cold War developing between China and the United States? Well, it seems so. Let's get our panel's opinion on this. General Lodi, you first. Of course, the Belt Road Initiative, a very broad, a very ambitious, and a very costly project being earmarked by President Xi Jinping and the Chinese. Of course, CPEC, a crucial and integral part of that. And Pakistan, time-tested, all-weather friend of Pakistan. China doesn't really seem to be too bothered about what the Americans have to say. Going a step further, the recent G Summit statement made by President Biden that the US's biggest threat comes from China. So would you agree with the assertion that the Americans are slightly worried about developments in this region and the rise of China?
Not only slightly worried, I think they are worried to a very large level. And the Cold War, which you're talking about, is already on, although the nature of Cold War is different. You know, the last Cold War was more about non-state actors and proxies and fighting away from their mainland, but it involved a lot of physical fighting. Other than, of course, it was also accompanied with economic undermining and political changes and all that. So I think, except for the physical skirmishes, the Cold War is already on. You have seen that what all threats and counter threats are there as far as South China Sea is concerned. We know that the problems as far as regarding Huawei and all that, the technology competition. and economic world order is being challenged by China. The hegemony of dollar is being challenged by both Russia and China. So the newly acquired powers of China and Russia and some other countries, they are challenging the world political order as well as the world economic order. So that war is already on. As far as this region is concerned, I think America has all physically abandoned their first line of defense, which was here. Of course, they are now out as far as Afghanistan is concerned. They are nearly out from Bangladesh. They are nearly out from Burma. Also, as far as Sri Lanka and such, all these countries are concerned. So this entire line, the first line, as I used to say, that has been abandoned only physically. But they will, in my opinion, they will come back economically and to economically contest as far as the investment is concerned, Chinese activities are concerned. But they are now forming a second line of defense as far as the Quad is concerned, Quad Plus is concerned within the Indo-Pacific region. So they are all geared up as far as this Cold War is concerned, and this Cold War, we should just pray because our region is involved. It should not, transform into a lukewarm war or some warm war or some hot war. That would be catastrophic for this region. But yes, they are not slightly worried. They are overly worried as far as this region is concerned. Central Asian countries, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, then Indo-Pacific region, Middle East countries, African countries. So this all is now, as per the American perception, it is all under threat because of as they call it, revisionist China and resurging Russia. And why do they call it revisionist? Because they seek revision of the existing world political order and the world economic order and the hegemony of dollar. So I think in the coming years, we will see a very intense Cold War in the field of economics and also in the field of politics.
One of the things, of course, which has perhaps been cranked up is the rhetoric we saw in the Trump campaign. And of course, Trump's sort of last sort of tenure was winding up his rhetoric vis-a-vis COVID. Coming to you, Moyed, I mean, this rhetoric we've seen, of course, President Trump was not mincing his words when he was putting the blame towards China regarding the source of COVID. How seriously do you think the Chinese are taking these kind of statements that China is the biggest threat to the United States, or is China such a focused country that it will just continue with its vision and in its continuous path that it's going in? And do you think that the Chinese will ever react to any of this brinkmanship by the Americans?
I think China is taking all these threats very seriously, and it's only recently that the U.S. and its allies have come out in the open regarding their concerns and their insecurities about China, majorly because of the fact that they have been lagging behind at virtually every sector when it comes to international power, when it comes to economic power, when it comes to international influence. Especially like you pointed out, starting off from the COVID issue, it was not just Trump. Washington basically rallied all of its allies. We saw Australia blaming China for COVID. Trump started off with calling it the China virus. Then there were multiple requests to the WHO by Washington and by American allies in Europe as well to probe. And they went inside China and they probed it, and they came out with the answer that no, it was not a man-made virus, which basically, as the West wanted to portray across the world, that it was basically China's desire to create some sort of a biological weapon, and it all went south, and which created havoc for the entire world. But with that at the back of China's mind, the problem with the United States is that while it was caught up in blaming China for all of this, it completely took its focus away from how to deal with the pandemic, was in a state of denial, as we all know, as Trump was blamed. And eventually, while the US was basically obsessing with all of this, China was dealing with the virus back home, and it managed to contain it, which eventually led to another blow to the US and its allies, which was that the Chinese industries were up and running like at least 1 year before the Western countries, American industry and the European industry could function at full capacity. So the economic edge there too went with China. So when it comes to China understanding or taking this seriously, they are taking it very seriously, majorly because of the fact that after this G7 summit recently, in which they very openly, everybody got on the same page, they decided to launch formally this Build Back Better World doctrine, basically a program to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative, which is now one of the most popular economic initiatives across the world, especially in countries which are looking to get out of this sick cycle of American hegemon of loans and then interest rates and all that, which tie them in this cyclical problem where they can't get out. So China is basically offering them a solution to that, to the Belt and Road Initiative. And like you pointed out, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is the flagship project when it comes to this greater initiative. When Pakistan was going with it, Pakistan was even Pakistan's Prime Minister, I believe so, has said this at the time, Nawaz Sharif, I believe he said that the US offered him over $5 billion or something like that just to say no to China over the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So the US is extremely wary of the growing influence and power of China in the world. And China has taken up measures recently and reciprocated in various forms. The last open meeting between the two sides in Alaska, we saw how the Chinese foreign minister came out swinging, and they completely lashed out at the United States for weaponizing human rights and making him a political tool to corner China and put sanctions on China. And they pointed out how the United States was bigoted in its approach regarding the state of human rights in the United States. So China they've been going toe to toe, head to head on this one. And what I fear, my concluding remark on this would be, what I fear is basically because of the fact that China is way ahead on all three of the games. Number one, international connectivity through BRI up against the B3W. Number two, the COVID situation. And number three, international soft power now. So there is a possibility that the Western countries might resort to other tactics which might not be as pleasant, as Mr. Lodi earlier in the segment pointed out, regarding leaving a mess in Afghanistan right on the doorstep of China, so that China would have problems with terrorism and it would hamper its growth. It's very similar to what happened after the big war when General MacArthur was called back by the United States from North Korea, and where he was when he was in a position to win that war and unite the two Koreas. There are many scholarships that believe that he was called back so that North Korea would continue its trajectory, and the US wanted a boogeyman in that region to make itself relevant. So the same situation can happen.
Okay, I just want to come to you, Isa, just picking up on what Moyed has said, that there may be some nefarious designs being sort of planned out in the West regarding this this sort of like Belt Road Initiative, and of course CPEC. Now, I want to sort of correlate this directly to the region, and of course Afghanistan, as he pointed out, could just be left to perhaps implode, if you may, and therefore create this sort of like bottleneck for this initiative. But of course, there are other players in the region who do have certain interests. One, namely to Pakistan's east, who of course is well known to be an ally of the United States. And of course, this must be troubling India very much so as well, this new cozying up relationship between Pakistan and China vis-a-vis the China-Pakistan economic corridor. Your take?
Well, if you see that the President of the United States, when he announced that we are pulling out of Afghanistan, what makes sense? Like, he should have contacted the Prime Minister of Pakistan. The very fact that the President of the United States is not contacting the Prime Minister of Pakistan is for the reason that Pakistan is now strategically aligned with China. And if you follow the interactions of Pakistan's Prime Minister with the Chinese media and international media after 15th of June, especially, where he's talking about how the United States and its allies have started a new zero-sum game where some countries are being pushed, are being told not to develop a good relationship with China. They are being pressurized. And it's being openly said by Prime Minister of Pakistan that it's unfair on part of the US to pressurize countries like Pakistan to pick sides. Now, this is happening out in the open, and we know what's going on in the region. And I will completely agree with what General Lodhi Saab has said in his remarks that it's not, it's a fact, it's a stated fact, it's happening under the broad daylight that now there is an active Cold War between China and the United States. And what signals do we get? We know that India and Russia have been historically, strategically aligned in the past 7 decades. But what happened in earlier part of this year when Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, landed in New Delhi that very evening, Quad plus, the Quad countries joined by the French Navy, they were holding Malabar drills off Thiruvananthapuram. And now what happens that when we see that all this pullout is taking place from Afghanistan, where the US and its allies and India and Japan and Australia are telling us that they are busy dealing with the Afghan crisis and evacuating their citizens out of Afghanistan, that very week, the last week of August, they were holding Malabar drills in Pacific Ocean off Guam. They were holding exercises. Now, because they know that China is doing away with its Malacca dilemma, which could actually lead to a possible issue that China deals with in its economic growth. And China is going to eventually become a two-ocean nation with a direct access to the Indian Ocean through Pakistan. So all this game and designs which are happening, which we see now happening in our region, stem from that very conflict which Joe Biden has openly announced since he assumed office. When he visited the State Department on 4th of February, then he made a speech on 14th of April when he was telling us that he's pulling out of Afghanistan to compete with China.
We'll probably pick up this discussion again once again, of course. China and the United States seems to be at loggerheads, and seems to be at loggerheads for one very good reason, that this particular geographical area, namely South Asia, has now become the focal point of the power struggle, what lies ahead. But what should lie ahead is the sense of progress and prosperity, something which Pakistan wants, something which the region wants, and moreover, something which is being endorsed by the Chinese. But it is yet to be seen whether or not the United States can stomach these latest developments, and whether or not it feels that under any circumstances this progress which is being showed by China should not be seen through to its conclusion. That's all we have time for today on The Quest. We'll catch you same time, same place tomorrow. Thanks for watching.